They built a V8 so powerful, it terrified its own drivers. They toyed with rotaries that regulators had to ban. For a decade, OMC didn't just compete with Mercury. They humiliated them, and then suddenly, the kings of outboard racing erased their own crown. This is the story of how OMC built perfection, then buried it. It's hard to believe now, but once upon a time, OMC ruled the water. 2 brands, 1 mission: outrun, outrev, and outlast Mercury at any cost. By the late 1960s, they were spending more money on racing than most companies made in profit. If it could burn fuel and scare a driver, OMC would try it. From the X115 to the 3.5-liter V8, their engineering was part genius, part madness. What followed was 2 decades of innovation, rivalry, and the kind of mechanical insanity that could only end one way: spectacular self-destruction. Every great rivalry starts with someone saying, "We can make it faster." For OMC, that moment came in 1967 when they unveiled the Evinrude X 115 and Johnson GT 115. The first outboards that came from the factory already hopped up like they'd had too much espresso. Under the hood sat OMC's trusty 99 cubic inch V4, except now it was breathing through bigger carbs, running higher compression, and spinning a race gear case so sharp it could slice your flip-flop. These things were never meant to idle. They just vibrated impatiently until you gave them full throttle. And when you did, they didn't accelerate. They teleported. The X115 wasn't for everyone. It was for people who thought seatbelts were optional suggestions. It screamed, smoked, and occasionally scared the dog right off the dock. Racers adored it. Neighbors hated it. Wives learned a new phrase: "I'll be back by sunset," which usually meant, "when I swim the boat back from wherever it exploded." But this wasn't just OMC being reckless. It was strategic chaos. They built the X115 for one reason: to wipe that smug grin off Mercury's face. And it worked. Suddenly, little white and blue boats were blowing past Merca's black monsters, leaving behind a trail of bubbles and bruised egos. Old-timers still say the X115 was the engine that ruined marriages. But it also made OMC a legend, because once they proved they could turn a mild-mannered fishing motor into a fire-breathing speed demon, they didn't stop to celebrate. They looked at each other and said, "All right, let's make it louder." That's when the real madness began. After the X115, OMC had a problem. They'd built a monster, and now everyone wanted a bigger one. So, in true hold-my-beer fashion, their engineers locked themselves in a workshop and emerged with 2 of the loudest, meanest V4s ever made, the Evinrude Super Strangler and Johnson Stinger GP. These weren't just tuned fishing motors. These were race-bred maniacs, designed to turn tunnel boats into low-flying UFOs. They had 1.6 liters of pure chaos, open megaphone exhausts, and enough decibels to make dolphins file a noise complaint. Idle? Forget it. These things didn't idle. They just waited angrily until you nailed the throttle. Drivers described them as part engine, part exorcism. You didn't drive one, you survived it. One racer said the first time he fired his Super Strangler, he nearly threw his stopwatch overboard because he thought time itself had slowed down. These V4s could push tiny race hulls past 90 miles per hour, back when life jackets were basically vests of good intentions. The Stinger GP and Super Strangler were OMC's message to Mercury. We're not here to play fair, we're here to play louder. And it worked. Their distinctive howl became a soundtrack of the 1970s racing pits. You could hear one fire up 3 lakes away, and if you couldn't, it probably meant yours had already blown up. Sure, they were temperamental. They leaked, smoked, and occasionally tried to grenade themselves mid-race. But when they ran, They were glorious. The fans loved it, Mercury hated it, and OMC engineers loved every second of it. These engines didn't just race, they started bar fights, ended friendships, and proved that subtlety had absolutely no place in outboard racing. By the late 70s, OMC's engineers had clearly lost all sense of moderation. The Super Strangler wasn't enough anymore. They wanted more cylinders, more noise, and probably more paperwork from the safety department. The result? The 3.0-liter Looper V6, better known by its ominous nickname, the CCC. Now, this wasn't your friendly neighborhood fishing motor. This was a caffeine-addicted six-pack of pistons that inhaled methanol and exhaled fear. With massive ports, fuel injection, and race-tuned internals, it made Mercury's engines look like polite house guests. When you cranked one up, the sound alone could strip paint off nearby docks and possibly your eyebrows. OMC treated these engines like national secrets. Racers didn't own them, they borrowed them. The company would literally check them out like library books, and if you blew one up mid-season, you just got a quiet look that said you break it, you buy dinner. But when the CCC ran right, it was poetry. The acceleration was so brutal that even veteran racers said their sunglasses tried to escape. These things could make a tunnel boat levitate, and occasionally the driver too. One mechanic joked that CCC didn't stand for competition cylinder charge. It stood for constantly consuming cash. Still, when a 300 came screaming down the straight, everyone stopped talking. Mercury fans pretended not to care, but you could see the fear in their eyes. OMC had finally built something so fast, so feral, that even the competition started taking notes. And inside the factory, the engineers just grinned, because they knew this wasn't the end. It was the warm-up act. The real insanity was still under wraps, and it had 8 cylinders. Just when you thought OMC couldn't get any wilder, they looked at their screaming two-strokes and said, "What if it didn't have pistons?" Enter the Rotary outboard experiment, the most ambitious, unnecessary, and gloriously deranged chapter in marine history. OMC had licensed Wankel rotary technology in the late 60s and was already stuffing these engines into snowmobiles. But of course, someone in Waukegan said, "Hey, let's bolt one to a boat and see what happens." Spoiler: chaos. The rotary prototypes were tiny, smooth, and spun like dental drills on caffeine. They didn't vibrate, they hummed, until they didn't. At full song, they hit RPMs so high that Mercury engineers probably started sweating in their sleep. The concept was genius. No reciprocating mass, no piston drag, just pure rotational fury. But the downside, fuel economy that could bankrupt a yacht club and maintenance manuals that read like war crimes in German. Racers who got to test them described the power band as incredible right before it exploded. Legend says one test boat went so fast, it scared its own driver into early retirement. Regulatory bodies didn't help either. They quietly banned rotaries from most racing classes, possibly to save humanity. OMC's engineers shrugged. They'd built the future and immediately been told to stop using it. As one old mechanic put it, it was like inventing a lightsaber, swinging it once, and getting arrested for public endangerment. The rotary program never hit production, but it did one important thing. It gave OMC a taste of what unrestrained power felt like, and that taste would lead to their next masterpiece, the monstrous V8 that made even fearless racers say, "Mas, nope." When OMC rolled out its 3.5-liter two-stroke V8 in the early 1980s, it didn't just raise eyebrows, it melted them. This wasn't an engine. It was a declaration of insanity. 8 cylinders, 450 horsepower, 9,000 RPM, on water. You didn't start it, You summoned it. The first time one fired up in a Formula One tunnel boat, people on shore reportedly ducked for cover. The noise was so violent, it could make seagulls drop out of the sky. Drivers called it the Widowmaker, which is not exactly the nickname you want for your weekend hobby. One racer joked, when it hits 8,000 RPM, it stops being an engine and starts being a weapon of mass propulsion. This monster could launch a 16-foot hull from idle to 100 miles per hour, faster than you could say insurance claim. It was so fast that Mercury, OMC's eternal rival, basically said, "You know what? We're good," and started focusing on smaller classes. For a brief moment, OMC stood alone on the throne of speed, laughing, screaming, and occasionally swimming back to shore. But the V8 wasn't just fast. It was greedy. It drank fuel like a Viking at happy hour and went through spark plugs like popcorn. If you owned one, you didn't worry about miles per gallon. You measured fun in minutes per tank. Still, nothing before or since has sounded like an OMC V8. It was raw, angry, and glorious. You didn't race it to win trophies. You raced it because therapy was too expensive. It was the peak of OMC's madness, the engine that made heroes, terrified spectators, and reminded everyone that sometimes going faster really can make things worse. After years of building engines that scared fish into therapy, OMC finally met an opponent it couldn't outrun: reality. By the late 80s, the racing division was bleeding cash faster than the V8 burned fuel. Those magnificent engines looked incredible on podiums, but not so much on profit sheets. And when your marketing slogan might as well be fast, loud, and financially irresponsible, the accountants eventually show up with pitchforks. The first problem? Money. Keeping fleets of 450 horsepower water grenades alive was expensive. Each V8 rebuild cost more than most people's boats. Even die-hard fans were starting to ask, does it come in an economy mode? Spoiler, it did not. Second problem? The EPA. In the 90s, environmental rules tightened and OMC, true to form, rushed out its shiny new fitched direct injection system. It promised cleaner, smarter two-strokes. Instead, it blew up, literally. Engines were failing, customers were furious, and dealers were handing out fire extinguishers with every sale. By 2000, the writing was on the transom. OMC filed for bankruptcy, and its two legendary brands, Evinrude and Johnson, were split up and sold off like souvenirs from a shipwreck. The same company that had built the fastest, loudest outboards on Earth suddenly couldn't build one that would survive a weekend at the lake. It was tragic and poetic. OMC's greatest strength, its obsession with pushing limits, was also its downfall. They won the horsepower war, but the accountants and regulators won the peace. One mechanic summed it up perfectly. They flew too close to the sun, and it threw a connecting rod through the sky. And just like that, the roar went silent. Even though OMC went belly up faster than a bad carburetor, their engines never truly died. They just became mythical creatures, the kind of machines people still whisper about at marinas like campfire stories with propellers. Mention a Super Strangler or a V8 OMC in a boat forum, and someone will immediately appear out of nowhere to say, "I knew a guy who had one until it scared him into selling the boat." Those old OMC racing outboards weren't just fast. They were personality tests with spark plugs. They leaked oil, smoked like a barbecue, and sounded like Zeus clearing his throat. But when they ran right, pure magic. There's nothing quite like the scream of an OMC V8 echoing across the lake. It's not just noise, it's an event. Today, if you find one still running, you're basically holding history that can still break the sound barrier, and maybe you're back. Collectors pay ridiculous money for restored examples, usually followed by more ridiculous money for replacement parts, because these things eat components like popcorn. But that's the charm. Half of owning one is fixing it, and the other half is bragging that you didn't blow it up. And here's the irony. In trying to dominate Mercury, OMC accidentally became immortal. Their racing engines may have disappeared from production, but they never disappeared from memory. The sound, the speed, the sheer madness of it all. It still defines what a real outboard feels like. As one old racer said with a grin, Mercury won the market, but OMC won our hearts and occasionally set them on fire. Even in silence, those engines still roar. So, to end things of here's what I think was, OMC's racing program burned fast, loud, and unforgettable. They didn't just build engines, they built legends that refused to die quietly. So which beast do you want next? The Rotary Outlaw or the 450 horsepower V8 monster? Drop it in the comments, hit subscribe, and buckle up. Because on this channel, the engines never really stop screaming.